Okay. Hello, everyone. Let's get started since a lot of people in and outside this building are very busy. So my name is Pari Riahi, and I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight. But before that, I'd just like to start by saying that this lecture is supported by the Department of Architecture and the University of Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art. Our guest tonight, Ms. Annabelle Selldorf, is the principal of Selldorf Architects, a 70-person architectural design practice that she founded in New York in 1988. The firm has worked on institutions and universities such as Brown University, New York University, the Clark Arc Institute, Neue Gallery in New York, and Umass in Arles. They are currently designing an expansion and enhancement of the Frick collection and have broken ground on an expansion project for the Museum of Contemporary Art at San Diego. In addition, they have created numerous galleries for David Zwirner, Hauser and Wirth, Gladstone Gallery, and design exhibitions for the Whitney, the Frieze Masters, Yagosian Gallery, and the Venice Biennale of Art. The firm has designed the largest recycling facility and education center in the U.S. in Brooklyn. Born and raised in Germany, Ms. Selldorf received a Bachelor of Architecture from Pratt and a Master's of Architecture from Syracuse University in Florence. She's a Fellow of the American Institute of Architects and a member of the American Academy of Art and Letters, and a recipient of their prestigious award in 2014, as well as the AIA New York Medal of Honor in 2016. Ms. Selldorf's work is diverse and covers a wide range, from that of residential to large civic and cultural institutions. She's equally at ease to work with existing buildings as is to build completely new work. She has designed progressive art galleries, a complex recycling center, large and small art foundations, mixed-use buildings, and master plans. The thread that connects these diverse and impressive projects is the architect's meticulous attention to identifying and tending to what is essential. While the material choices are often fully restrained, the attention to light, spatial choreography, and beauty, a term long forgotten by many of her contemporaries, come to the fore to remind us that buildings are so much more than a setting for life to unfold in. Please join me in welcoming Annabelle Selldorf.
Hi, can you hear me? Thank you so much for this. It's very confusing. Okay, thanks. Thank you so much for coming in such numbers. Thank you for this lovely introduction. I have a word of warning. I go on a bit, so if you have a Coca-Cola or something, get ready now. So the lecture is called Current Work, but we actually thought that it would be nice to give you a little bit of an introduction to the office by starting with work that goes back some time. And so here is an image of the studio, which is located on Union Square in New York City, and a place I really love. It's beautiful construction and a fantastic place for some 70 people to work very collaboratively, very experimentally. And if there's one thing I'm proud of, I'm really proud of the culture in the office that is a group of very diverse people from everywhere. People like to come and stay for a while, and you can see it sort of in action here. So the first project that got me in touch with something that we do a lot of was an art gallery on New York's East 67th Street, an area where there are lots of old master painting galleries, and this is a contemporary art gallery for a German art dealer, Michael Werner. And of course that gallery doesn't exist anymore. at my age, you now have to contend sometimes with things that don't exist anymore. Anyway, this was a space, very small, 1,500 square feet, that I was very proud of. Very proud of because it was so incredibly simple. It consisted of an exhibition space, an office space, and a minuscule little showroom. And when I was commissioned with it, I knew so much about every aspect of the drawing that I still, if you asked me today, I would still remember the dimensions, and I'd still remember how I detailed drawers for graphic things, and every aspect of every built-in was very, very close to me, and in a way became the foundation of an architectural vocabulary that in some ways remains unchanged. A lot of this really is about looking at art, but also about introducing light and proportion, a kind of clarity of space and circulation, and even in this small space, that mattered. So earlier you mentioned materiality, and in some ways I like fewer materials than more materials, but of course it matters that they are the right ones and that they are in the right combination. And so we'll be talking a little bit more about that. Here is another image of the exhibition space. And shortly after we did this gallery, we were introduced to Ronald Lauder, who intended to do a new museum on New York's Upper East Side. And it's called the Neue Galerie, Museum for German and Austrian Art, on 86th Street and Fifth Avenue. And I remember going to look at this building. I had been invited to come look at it, and was told that it was a small renovation. And I basically gasped, thinking, this is a real museum. And it wasn't a museum yet, but we painstakingly renovated the place. And it is today one of the established museums on the Museum Mile in New York. However, it's small. It's a house museum, and you can see here in this section that it's quite interesting because in the heart of it is a tall skylight that brings daylight all the way down to the ground floor. And in some ways, it's a beautiful Beaux-Arts building by Carrere and Hastings. It was designed as a mansion, as a private mansion, and there were certain realities about the building that obviously remained. However, making a private mansion, later an institution for Jewish scholarship, into a public museum was no small feat, because it required all sorts of interventions like HVAC, lighting, safety issues. And in some ways the thought was people shouldn't understand that anything had been done at all, but in other ways you also wanted to be sure that the house felt like a museum. So on this main floor that you're seeing here, we introduced this big glass ceiling that created at once an opportunity for even light in the space, but it took this kind of domestic feel of this room a little bit away and turned it into a museal space, and that is the room where today the Woman in Gold, the fantastic Gustav Klimt painting, is at home. And each room presented a difficulty of a different kind. In each room there were small interventions that we proposed and that we made that went together with the building, but that also indicated that something had happened, that some care had been given to this space, and that art could be looked at in a slightly different way. For example, in this space, we obviously restored and renovated all the paneling, but the ceiling is brand new with modern contemporary lighting, these freestanding vitrines that we found, and And then the top floor that's dedicated to special exhibition looks different every time. And this small museum has an ability to curate shows different every time, frequently very much about the period of what they're showing, mainly German and Austrian art until 1945. And so oftentimes these exhibitions are very thematic. The first one, was a Bauhaus exhibition, and in some ways it still is my favorite because you can see all of the daylight, you can see the clarity, get where I'm coming from. So in that continuity, some years later, we did a new building for David Zwirner, an old friend who I have done a lot of work for over the years. A new building on 20th Street in New York, Chelsea's Art District. What was there was a garage building, essentially, and while our outlook on building is to really think about repurposing building and trying to save and build sustainably and efficiently, this wasn't really possible in this particular case. And once we decided to take the building down because of its unsuitable nature, we were able to define a new program. And that program is essentially about one big central space, one that we sometimes think of as the heart of the building. It's a big gallery space that is some 80 by 80 feet wide and has north-facing skylights, and an L-shaped building that sort of creates a ring around it. What you see here in red are exhibition spaces, and those parts that are blue are vertical core elements. So not only do I think that this is an attractive building that has a near perfect exhibition space suited exactly to the requirements of our client, I also think it's a very efficient building. And I got very interested in the idea of sort of thinking about what are we doing here. It's a building that is for art and artists, but it is also, of course, very much a building for people. And so there is a space ample enough for people to arrive in, and then the sequence of looking at exhibition is very clear. It's also maybe the first commercial art gallery that had a goal to hit a LEED Gold certification. And it includes all those good things, the north-facing skylights, super efficient HVAC systems, cross-ventilation, vertical staircases, and so on and so forth, which I think is a really interesting, was for me a very interesting thing, because it was the first time that we sort of articulated that sustainable building has to really be a matter of common sense and has to be a part of what you consider every day. And obviously everybody has been exposed to a lot of conversation in these last couple of days about climate crisis, but making it not a crisis, but creating an understanding that we have to live more naturally and have to be more responsible with the resources available is a very big task for architects, and one that I think is simply not emphasized enough ever. And so we used a relatively carbon-intense material, concrete here, so what the hell am I talking about? But we compensated, I will say. And so my love for concrete is not completely irresponsible. It is one of those materials that you can build very efficiently with. But having said that, there's got to be a balance to everything. And so, well, if you have a cast-in-place concrete facade, you have to compensate for that with more insulation, and all these other initiatives that include what I just said, cross-ventilation and the like. There is a wooden storefront and all of the windows are wood. And so it's a very elegant, very restrained building that presents itself as a container of art, but is at the same time really quite dynamic. And here you see a picture of the concrete staircase that winds itself all the way to the top of the building, where there is a green roof and there is a big skylight over it, so daylight informs the building at all times. Here is an image of the large exhibition space, which often gets divided for different kinds of exhibitions. But this is my favorite image because, as you can imagine, having an exhibition space with purpose-made Richard Serra sculptures sort of makes the architect very happy. And if you then hear from the artist that this is a good space, that is just as good as a gold medal. But different kinds of exhibitions happen in here. As I said, the spaces aren't always used in the same way. But I feel that each exhibition is eminently possible and really interesting in the context of the entire circulation. So this is an image of a Dan Flavin installation on the ground floor, whereas the second floor exhibition space is quite different in the proportions. It has side daylight from the side rather than from the top. It has a wood floor rather than a concrete floor. And I think it changes the viewer's perspective on the perception of art. And that, of course, is the purpose of this. It's not just a place for people to come and visit art, but it's also where some 60 people work today. And so it was very important from the get-go to make this a place that takes care of how people come together in the workplace. And I always enjoy meetings in that library. So we're going to do a quick jump to a project that we're still working on and have been working on for a fairly long time. This is Luma Arles, an art foundation in the south of France, in Arles. And this area indicated in red here is what was at one time a railway factory. It's connected to the city of Arles by, it's very close by, but Arles is a place with many with deep Roman history, and you can see in the image there is a Colosseum, there's also an amphitheater, there are lots of Roman ruins, and it is otherwise a very beautiful, kind of quaint little town in the south of France. So when SNCF, the railway company, closed down in 1954, the entire area, that which is outlined in red, sort of fell into disrepair. It was full of buildings that were erected in the early 20th century that had a kind of factory character with cast iron structure and a sort of serial character in terms of factory building. So already in this site plan, you can see the repetitiveness of the roofs. And here is another image. Well, what's remarkable about the site is that it was acquired by the patron of Luma, and they decided to hire Frank Gehry to do a kind of monumental arts building on this site. This was long before I came, before I joined the team, so to speak. And this particular picture is actually taken from this building of Frank Gehry's, which is quite tall and sort of in competition with the Colosseum rather than with the industrial buildings. Well, you may think of that building what you will, but the point is that there is a really interesting juxtaposition between this very sculptural, very monumental, unique building on the boulevard to the repurposed industrial buildings that are some 7 meters lower level-wise than the tower and the boulevard is. I have quite enjoyed working with these old structures. Essentially, there was really nothing left than the shell. But in one case, that which you see in the background, that black building, we added to one of the existing buildings simply because it was necessary to create exhibition space that had larger column-free width. And I am talking to you as if you are familiar with all of these issues, but these things come about when you're thinking about how do you exhibit in a space, how do you make spaces that are large enough so that large sculptures can be brought in and out, so that light is directed in the proper way. And in my esteem, there's always an idea about sort of being recessive with gestures in an art space so as to allow the art to function on in the first order, so to speak. And here are a couple more images of this addition to the space, and I'll show you some of the inside. We sort of obviously took our cues from the serial quality of the bay layout of the individual roofs there, but used completely different materials, different fenestration, and different access points. In the summer, it is very sunny there, and so what you always find in the south of France are these kind of caned roofs, and so we use that along the solid large facade to create an agreeable walkway for people circulating amongst the old buildings. And this is what that looks like on the inside. I really love looking at that structure and restoring and repairing it, providing new skylights, finding ways of keeping getting the skylights to be shaded, having natural openings, natural ventilation through openings in the skylights. All that was fun and interesting, and here you see the space in action. A lot of freedom to create different kinds of partition layouts, very simple concrete floor, underfloor radiance, so that no actual air conditioning is part of this exhibition space. And then there is another building which is called the Forge, where at one time the forgery was, and that is half a ruin, and half of that space that had no roof left we turned into an outdoor courtyard that is very much there for people to come together. There's a small cafe in there. Sometimes there's concerts in there. And it is really nice to sort of bring community into this abandoned area. Little by little, a park is getting a hold of it. I was just there a little while ago, and having worked on this place for 5 or 7 years, it's so incredibly interesting to see how the people who live in Arles increasingly think of this as one of theirs. And they have become more interested and more engaged with art projects, and in return there's also a park that's growing little by little. Here is just a couple more images. This one in particular is a building that's called the Formation, where we made a rehearsal space on the top floor, and small performances can be had there. The other day when I was there, there was a symposium that was being held there, but dance was very much at at the heart of this center. Now, what's interesting about that building is that you have two 5-meter tall spaces. And we wanted to create a kind of dormitory space for dance companies who would reside for a period of time. And so we utilized that same CLT system that this building is made with to create a house within a house. There's a duplex kind of series of bedrooms that is connected by a staircase, and 14 people can sleep in these very custom-made little bedrooms and are always part of the original building. There's a large space where there's a shared community kitchen, and that spirit of bringing people together, having people come together, eat together, drink together, dance together, is very much what is at the heart of this organization, and it's great to see it come together. Slightly in a different direction now in California. This is a project that we've been working on for a number of years that is now under construction. It's called the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, and is located in La Jolla. And it all started with a small residential building by Irving Gill, a sort of proto-modernist architect who originally came from Chicago and was very innovative with sort of construction ideas by using tilt-up slabs. Anyway, this is a small building, it wasn't that small, but it was a private house for a lady by the name of Ellen Scripps. And she, after her death, gave this to what was the early days of the Museum of Contemporary Art. I think then it was called the Arts Building or something like that. But over time it grew. In the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s it was renovated successively by a company from San Diego, by a group of architects called Mosier Drew. And eventually it was added on to, again, by Bob Venturi and Denise Scott Brown. And what happened in the last renovation, which was 1997, was that there was attention given to the front of house, but no attention to the gallery space, which the museum sorely needed. So fast forward to, I don't remember when, a few years ago, we were hired and brought in to create more gallery space. And so today I can really only show you renderings and the sort of explanatory diagram that shows you that all that which is green is part of the original, or say the the footprint that we found. The red part was a concert hall, and the blue part is what we're adding. So why am I explaining this? Is because this is on a very steep hillside overlooking the ocean, and the location is really spectacular, but also very, very difficult. So the museum acquired a property to the south. All that which is blue is the newly acquired property, and we were tasked with adding some 30,000 square feet of gallery space. How to do that? A big part of it was to really understand how you would connect all of the diverse parts, how to reveal the original Irving Gill building, maintain the majority of the Venturi buildings. Denise Scott Brown was very worried, you may or may not know about that, that her and her husband's building wouldn't be properly acknowledged, and especially not because we were proposing to change the entrance to the building. I'm very happy to say that I have actually convinced them that what we're doing is really entirely honoring the legacy of Venturi in La Jolla, despite the fact that we are changing the entrance to the building. It was previously a little bit difficult to find it, and now you can't help but walk into the museum the minute that you come to La Jolla. And you're going to want to go there, because there is fantastic art to see, and I think this sort of new composition of different building parts is going to be a really interesting trip, I was going to say, across Southern California art. So there is a very simple, not very large entrance pavilion, tall exhibition spaces that take advantage of the height of the concert hall, a sort of a kind of courtyard gallery, and a series of galleries that cascade down the hill to sort of capture this incredibly nice view. Here you're seeing it from a bird looking at the museum, but you would normally find yourself in the museum looking out at the ocean. As you can see, it's kind of a jumble of buildings, and a big part of what we're doing is really trying to knit them together so that together the ensemble of different periods is going to come across as something that is truly worthy of the beautiful landscape that is La Jolla. Now, not very far from here is a project that we did at the Clark Institute in Williamstown. And we were one part of a group of architects. Tadao Ando did the visitor center of the museum, and we Selldorf architects were in charge of renovating and restoring the original building, which is referred to as the 1955 building, by an architect called Daniel Perry from New York. Now, this building, obviously built in 1955, had all sorts of idiosyncrasies, and mainly when we started working on it, the entrance had been changed from the east to the south, and now with the newly added visitor center, it was going to be axial again and enter from the west. So what you see in this building, in this picture, is actually a composite of different buildings. To the right, you see the Manton Library, and to the left, you see a little bit of the white marble building that is the 1955 buildings, was sort of a part of the Ando building at an angle to it. Now, why am I explaining this so lengthily? It is because it is all about the composition of all of these buildings. Similar to what I just talked about in La Jolla, I think what is really interesting about this is that different styles of architecture clash with one another, but somehow or other in this most recent renovation, they come together and actually make a place for people and make a place for art, and most importantly perhaps, make a case for nature and the relationship we have with nature. This is located in the Berkshires, and as you enter the building, you sort of have an opportunity to look at the landscape that has these marvelous mountains and is truly gorgeous at any time of the year. These are just a couple of images to show you some of the renovated galleries. And I'm not going to talk about it at any length because there is a wonderful collection that was very much part of the design process in understanding where are things going to be hung, how are people going to go through the museum, what are they going to see in what sequence, how do you create circulation around a museum that is at once logical but not prescriptive, and in some ways the museum looks as if it had always been that way, and in other ways it's completely different. And I would hope that at some point you are inspired to go there and discover it for yourselves, because it's that coexistence of a slightly unusual building where the vision of a modernist architect that was Daniel Perry comes together with a client who had very traditional ideas. And there is a little bit of tension in there. And I think that in the end, we didn't change that. We just made it a little bit more gentle and a little bit more logical. And like I said, there are really beautiful works of art there, and it's fun to see. And part of our job was also to work at the Manton Research Center, which includes a print study center and a small renovation of the auditorium. And again, here we encountered a building from the 1970s, Pietro Belluschi, a building that has a little bit of a brutalist quality about it, maybe not a little bit, maybe a lot, but that has marvelous spaces and fantastic integrity in the building technology, and a building that I thought was really very interesting. And so we made a reading room out of what was a grand auditorium and a sort of not so good entrance to the museum at one time. And it has now become a place where people love to go. Students from Williams come over here and study. They use the adjacent library, or they go to the Print Study Center where you can see a really incredible collection. And again, this is one of those projects where many different periods come together, and all of it has to do with thinking about how do people use it, how do you make agreeable space that is that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. This is a residence on Martha's Vineyard. Other than museums, we also occasionally build houses. And I think building houses is always an interesting thing because you get to know your clients. You get to think about much of what I've been talking about, is of understanding how people move in space, how people use space, how you can inspire an interaction with nature, especially in this particular case. There are altogether 5 little buildings on this site, of which one, the biggest one, is a single-story glass house. And it kind of creates the scenario for a circulation around the site that allows you to experience this really kind of old landscape. It's a typical Martha's Vineyard landscape with lots of stone walls, expansive views. When people think of Martha's Vineyard, they often think of properties by the sea. In this case, this is a large site, and the ocean is nowhere to be seen. Maybe it is smelled. But for me, what was attractive is to take advantage of that expansive land, of the sort of beautiful vistas across these large fields. And to the right here, this is looking from the glasshouse at the other buildings. To the left, you see the oldest house on Martha's Vineyard that we restored very painstakingly. To the right of it, the brick building is a rebuilt barn that we built from plans that we could find at the local library. And here is a very low-slung wood and glass house that is entirely free in the landscape, that has views from every room, and is just so low-key that it really is about this. And I love this. For me, this is one of my favorite houses that I've worked on, because it is so quiet and there. Now, I've already talked a lot, so I'm going to run through pictures and let you go home soon. Here is another picture of this house, but a couple of condominium buildings that we've done in New York City I thought were worth showing. I'm not going to go into too much depth, but here, this building, 10 Bond Street, is in a landmark district, and so came together in negotiation with the Landmarks Preservation Commission. And what we had to do is we had to really think about what materials are appropriate, what is the kind of structural bay size that makes sense, where you have a cast iron district to the south and sort of very heavy brick buildings to the north. This building is an all terracotta clad building in a kind of rusty color, and the sheer pleasure of the material is something that I don't usually indulge in, but I will say that I love looking at this myself in all kinds of light, because it's sort of has such a powerful texture, and it's very much become a little corner landmark there on Bond Street and Lafayette Street. And here are some images from the inside. You have this fantastic corner view all the way down Lafayette Street, and a sort of very open loft-like floor plan. It's like, where are you going? Head on east. A couple more images of another building on Crosby Street, which is also in a landmark district. Here we're immediately surrounded by cast iron buildings. And again, this was a negotiation in terms of volume and detail with the Landmarks Preservation Commission. And I am very happy with this facade design, because it kind of follows a proportional idea that you can see even in this picture a little bit to the left, the cast iron rhythm. But instead we replaced the materials with stainless steel and aluminum in a sort of layered fashion. It has very progressive exterior shading, so that there's energy conserved on the outside rather than on the inside. Lots of daylight, a rear garden that has a kind of woodland quality to it, and a picture on the inside that is in very strong dialogue with the surrounding buildings, and lots of life on the street. I think this building makes a nice neighbor to the historical buildings surrounding it. Completely different project is the recycling facility, material recovery facility in Brooklyn. And again, I'll go through this quite quickly, but for us this project was a very important one, because it's the first kind of infrastructural project of a significant size. Today, this recycling facility that came to be on an empty pier in Brooklyn Sunset Park is one of the most progressive recycling facilities in America. And it is, we were part and parcel of planning, of organizing a master plan, but but shall we say the processes of one such recycling facility are very much organized through the sequence of events. It's like materials get delivered, they get processed, they get cubed, and then they get picked up. So trucks, rail, and barges enter and leave the facility. And then in addition to that, of course, is traffic that goes for people who work at the facility, but also there is an education center, which is the little building that you can see in the very front. The tipping building, the largest building, is covered with one of the largest solar panel arrays, although I realize that you have a lot of solar panels here at Umass. And this is also one of the first sites where New York City allowed for a windmill. We worked strictly with pre-engineered building material, building design, but turned the structure outside to the outside, so it's not just a big box building. We wanted there to be more scale. We utilized a prefabricated corrugated metal that's called, what is it called? Fibril. And it's a light gray color and sets the tone. And here is water and barges, and you can see the tipping building in the rear. This is the processing building, and it took me quite some time to figure out how to run all of these. Okay, I had nothing to do with this. But it is remarkable when you see the technology in there and when you understand how totally sophisticated the separation techniques are. There are robots handling a great deal of this material. A big part of this was to actually reduce the labor force, and that, of course, is a good thing because nobody wants to rummage around in here. It's also quite dangerous. And what you see here in the foreground is the education center, a relatively small building that has a full second floor of educational material, and then on the third floor, which presents itself a little bit as a tower, a connection with a bridge to the tipping building, so that people who come to the facility can actually view all of the processes, which I think is very exciting for most school classes. And here is an image of that metal corrugated material that I think really is very elegant. Again, having a relationship with nature on this sort of pier that steps out. It's very nice. You have some good views from here. And that's my point. All that sort of wild nature around the facility has sort of grown into being something that is perhaps a little bit unusual, but it's very nice. Only a few images about the Frick collection. That's a very interesting and complicated project for us. It is at once renovating a very well-loved museum in New York City, but expanding it in the back and bringing the library that is part and parcel of the institution, but today accessed only on 71st Street, together with the collection building. I don't know how many of you have been to the Frick, but in New York, people care a great deal about the building, among other reasons, because it sort of brings together a very elegant building designed by Thomas Hastings, later by John Russell Pope, together with a formidable art collection. And it is the sort of grandeur of the house that that people are very attached to, because looking at art in the context of this beautiful house has become something that's very unusual in New York and sort of allows people to come up close to the collection. So when we were hired to work on the expansion, we were very careful to make sure that people understand that we're going to change nothing that people really care about. We're going to replace leaky skylights. We're going to perhaps change some of the rugs. We're going to improve the lighting. But the real work really happens in areas where the public can be received and access the building in the reception hall and in the distribution to a new auditorium. This image only to illustrate that we're going to open the second floor to the public, which is currently closed. There are offices in the upper floors. And here, quickly, an image of the addition to the library that you see in the rear and in the front, a quasi-unchanged original building. I think it'll go too far if I go through this floor plan. I could, though. I could talk for a few minutes. No, I won't. All that which is red is public space. All that which is pink is visitors' amenities. And I think that is really all there is to, and all that which is green is new education space. And that's really sort of the key thing to understand, that this renovation is really all about making the space more welcoming, better for people visiting it. It's making it accessible, which it isn't today. It's providing a new auditorium that is below the existing Russell Page garden, and will altogether be very discreet, but I think make people, allow people to enjoy this incredible collection so much more readily. And here are some images of the new reception hall, a new special exhibitions gallery, and a view across 70th Street. And we're really coming to an end. This is the last project. This is a school that just opened a couple of months ago. It's a school in Zambia, a pro bono project that we did for the Plus 14 Foundation. And that is really very dear to my heart, because it was an incredible experience finding that everybody in the office wanted to work on this project, and everybody was interested to think about how can we create a school in an area where schools are few and far between, and perhaps with architecture make a difference to how people learn. And so here you see a site plan. It's a fairly flat terrain, kind of bushland. And there's a main building with a large shade tent. The shade tent is right here because it gets very hot during the hot seasons. Their winter is our summer and vice versa. And kids are playing, and all that which is brick are man-made compression bricks. That was a big part of it. The idea was really to sort of create a community in this area. Local people built every aspect of the school, and so there's a juxtaposition of a tall steel shade tent and the lower man-made brick classrooms and art spaces. There's a lot of ideas about bringing daylight in, having cross-ventilation, simple spaces, but all of them about circulation and connection. And, oops, that's it. Thank you very much. Of course.
Curious how you operate the office in terms of studio specialization. Is there cross-fertilization, or is it the museum folks and the school folks? Or how do you work those things?
I'm a great believer in everybody doing everything. We don't think of ourselves as a specialized place as much as we think that in collaborative teams we communicate to one another the things that we have experience with from other projects. And that's the only good thing about getting older, is that you do get experience. So while we don't have specializations, we have a sort of fairly well-organized team of a couple of design partners, project managers, project architects, and project collaborators and teams, architects, younger architects in those teams. And it's fairly well organized in terms of who does what, but done in such a way that contribution comes from everybody. And if you want to come visit the office, you'll see that the way it is structured is that there are these 5 spaces. We call them pods, and people sit around around the perimeter with a big table in the middle where everybody works together. And this idea of collaborative teamwork is something that permeates virtually everything, but that also provides a kind of safety net for the younger people so that they can turn to the project manager or the project architect, whoever is part of the team, to sort of ask questions. And it seems to work well. But no, we're not specialists.
So you seem to very easily weave in and out of existing buildings, working on existing building and designing completely new buildings. Do you even have a preference, or do you feel that it's equally easy to work on a new project versus an existing project?
Well, I really believe that it's very important to think about context. I think it is better to have cities that grow over time than that are built all in one fell swoop. And I think it's only if we remember the past that we can imagine the future. And I don't think that invention is really the most interesting aspect of it. Having said that, I think that you never want to think of architecture as something that is anything less than progressive. I think architecture's role is to make people's lives better. Architecture is for people, and therefore it has to pick up on social and every other value. And as long as you keep that in mind, I think that will inform the architecture. If I only had to restore, renovate, repurpose buildings, I'd be sad. But it is really the combination of the two. I think it's a little bit a responsibility that we have, is to try and find what we can do with substance that we have. And I think that more today than I did when I was younger. At the same time, I think that you have to also push forward, open the doors, make things more transparent, bring people in, communicate more, have more on the table. And sometimes that means you have to build new buildings. So I don't know that that answers your question, but I actually want to do everything is really the bottom line.
So you started the talk by talking a little bit about the impermanence of your buildings as time goes by, and you've also talked about how you deal with volumes in landmark situations, and there's a very clear respect to the surroundings when you see what you've created, especially when you put it in a juxtaposition with a culture of monumental buildings. And I just wanted to hear a little bit about your philosophy and your approach to the site and the research about the site and the way that people already engage with the space before you go ahead and create a program.
Well, that's a big question because I think that what you put in your question was you used the word research. And increasingly, I think that the more research you can do, the more possible opportunities present themselves. So when you have a program, more often than not, you are given a program by the client. But I believe that the architect's relationship with the client ought to be based on dialogue, on critical interaction with the program and on discovery of things. So I think to begin with, the client knows usually more than the architect does. And it's the architect's job to find absolutely everything there is to know, and then some. And maybe that's the beginning of an answer to your question, is that as you learn about substance that exists, you find out about beautiful possibilities or miserable realities, and they point you in a direction. And the more you know, is really what it's like.
Curious about Arl. It looks, you're talking about it sort of a work in progress. Are you seeing that the relationship with the client, is it gradually over time, maybe more of those old railroad factory buildings become incorporated into something new, or is it done?
Well, most of the buildings are finished now, and the big building, the Gary building, is still under construction. One aspect of the site that has yet to sort of come completely to fruition is the park that kind of glues everything together. And it's already evident that by the time that park is fully there and fully green, it will create a kind of dynamic relationship between the buildings and between the different activities that is really, really significant. Among other reasons, because there is no such thing as a public park in Arles. And so to have that kind of amenity and bring yet another layer of public interaction into this site, I think is really going to have a very big impact. And I can't wait to see that, because for many years now you sort of go across the site and it's very dusty and very sort of unfriendly. But yeah, I mean, I think that how and when the buildings open, what different activities take place, that is still in the process of evolving. And I think there'll be a big step when Frank Gehry's building opens, and there are more exhibition spaces and different kinds of things that can take place in that building.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.